around your head that you'd like to ask Ryan. So what we might do is hands up if you want to take the time now to ask Ryan some questions. It's worth it. We have some that we've prepared earlier for this very reason. Oh, yay. So we'll just get... Hey, Ryan.
Hi.
Here's the camera. Can you see us?
Yeah, I can see you all.
Okay, thank you so much for your presentation.
Oh, no problem.
Okay, let's hope the internets work. So
Yeah.
we've got a question over this way for you.
Firstly, it was good to hear you speak. I visited Eastman Kodak House in, George Eastman House in 1995. My wife comes from Hilton near Rochester. I'm curious to know what the development is in terms of using holograms for storing particularly three-dimensional items, particularly if they're massive.
That's a really interesting question, and one that I haven't done too much digging about. There's some storage technology that takes advantage of holographic stuff that would be great if there were 30 more years worth of kind of proven use in the field. But in terms of holograms for what holograms are great for, which is three-dimensional imaging, that's a really interesting idea. And while the end result isn't strictly the kind of three-dimensional modeling that one would do, for example, the retail, one part of the retail operations of the Met is a kind of 3D scanner guy that can either do kind of 3D objects or kind of the stuff where you go out into the field to do 3D scans of the environment, both of which are kind of interesting forms of digital capture, but I haven't seen too much of it happen in terms of the digitizing collection side yet. I don't know what will kind of result from that. I think that holograms might have been a really interesting transitional technology, but now that we can do kind of 3D models proper, that'll probably be the way it goes. In fact, this weekend, my department at the Met is doing the Met's first 3D hackathon, where we're inviting 3D artists to come and try and do 3D models of some of the collection material. But it's an interesting idea. It's an interesting idea. There's certainly format preservation challenges with anything 3D, and holographic would have kind of the same challenges. But I don't think we'll see a lot of it, only because now we can get it into the computer kind of proper.
Hi, Ryan. Enjoyed your talk very much. Thank you. You were critical of the concept of using the cloud for storing our digital content. Given that many believe, and not just me, that in the future the cloud may well be where many institutions will be storing their digital information, and it's also for smaller institutions. I would have thought it's a very cost-effective place to hold their digital data. Given those 2 points, do you see it changing in the future in terms of recommending? I mean, at the moment, yes, it makes sense to have a copy on site as well as being able to make access to it through the cloud. But do you see that changing in the future?
I mean, certainly this whole notion of distributed computing in the cloud isn't going anywhere. And certainly there lies the possibility that the legislative changes that need to happen to keep that data safe in the museum context could one day happen. As it stands now, the cloud is perfectly reasonable as a mechanism for access or a mechanism for kind of tertiary or secondary storage, or really even primary storage, so long as you've got the ability to recover from an off-site or an on-site copy. So it's not so much that the cloud's inappropriate, it's that if it's only in the cloud, there's a significant risk of data loss that's beyond an institution's control. And from my vantage point, I mean, certainly there are some institutions that are so resource bound that might be their only option for doing kind of digital business. But for any institution that can actually resource an on-site copy, that will always be the kind of safest storage location. I mean, that's the beauty of digital, right? Is that you can have 20 copies of something in 20 different physical locations, and that you shouldn't ever really have data in only one physical location. But there should be copies of the data within your, I'll say jurisdiction, but I mean kind of direct technology control, because it's way too easy for, the U.S. government is a great example of an institution that can go in there and be like, this data center belongs to us now, and you can have it when we're done with it. And that's a really scary idea from my point of view for digital preservation's sake. And I mean, that was the scary thing about the whole mega upload thing, is that that wasn't even U.S. jurisdiction that kind of came in and just took it. So yeah, there's the risk of that, and a lot of innocent data got kind of swept up in the crossfire of the mega upload thing. So as long as stuff like that's still going on, I'm still always going to kind of look at the cloud as a storage mechanism for preservation with a weary eye.
Okay, thanks.
Hello, thank you very much for your talk earlier. The name is Miguel. I'm from the Royal Botanic Gardens Library here in Sydney. What do you see any problems in the foreseeable future in terms of future-proofing digital collections? I'm talking about changes in foreseeable changes in technology, formatting, storage media, etc.
I'm a big believer in not doing something until you know you need to do it. And so, future-proofing, to me at least, initially lends this kind of notion of like, trying to guess which way a particular technology is going to go. And there are some people that are really, really good at that. I'm not one of them. I was always no, this Betamax thing, it's technically better. Or, mini disc, it's awesome. There's been a whole host of formats that I really would have liked to see work that didn't work out. I mean, there are certainly some lessons we can draw from, like, kind of past, what problems have emerged in the past, and that's stuff like never ever trusting what optical media says it can store or can do, because every time we've had optical media in the preservation landscape, it's gone poorly. And then you can also kind of look, like right now, when I left Eastman House, we were still settled on TIFF as our standard, because there were still some funny legal bits for Adobe to work out with respect to digital negative for two-dimensional imaging. But there are plenty of institutions that are comfortable with adopting the next file format before Eastman House would be, for example. So I don't think there's anything that I can see on the horizon that would really transformationally shift the way I think about digital preservation. But, I'm kind of looking at every iteration of a digital asset as that digital asset at a moment in time. It's kind of separating the thing from the vessel, because the vessel will almost surely change when we're talking about born digital.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Good evening to you. My name is Joe. I'm not a museum person. I'm a volunteer archivist. And I help look after records and provide answers to people going back to the early 1800s in Australia. The problem is, once you start digitising the records, which we're starting to do, you then have the horrible problem of what do you do with the old paper records, which are slowly eating themselves. Have you got any tips on that? Please.
I would never, ever advocate, as a museum person, I don't think I could ever keep my job and advocate doing anything to the originals once you've digitized them. I would say that if I had to give my museum answer, I would find a paper conservator and figure out how to at least slow their eating of themselves. But you know, digitization isn't the end of the game, particularly when you're talking about paper records, because the problem with digitizing lots of old paper records is that what you end up with is something that's kind of less findable or less searchable than you started with. It's kind of, unless you're doing some rudimentary cataloging or even some advanced cataloging, there could still be important information in not even necessarily the records themselves, but the way the records are physically organized. So until you can be reasonably sure that you've got a system that you can kind of search and retrieve stuff from as good as you could with the paper records, I would say try not to do anything with them. I mean, try and keep them around. But at some point, you do have to, you know, the paper degrades and things happen. But you just got to hope by the time you've gotten there that you've done enough of the digitization work to make the digital surrogates for the paper records as useful as the paper records were.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm a local studies librarian. Thanks for meeting with us today. It's been really good. I manage a small collection, and with our photographs, we have them all digitized now. And the digital photographs, we also have them in our catalog. So we catalog them, and then they're stored on our library server. And then we have a copy offsite on a council server, but it's still all local government. Is that enough for an institution of our size, for a small institution right now?
I mean, you know, it's not a hard. I have a hard time with a hard yes or no on that, because it's all about your level of risk tolerance. If your level of risk tolerance is, you know, you're reasonably okay with even like a local environmental disaster potentially causing data loss, then yeah. If I was in the situation of being in a small collection with two copies, both kind of sort of geographically near one another, I'd probably try or advocate for throwing a copy in the cloud or somewhere where the server's like more in the United States, or, you know, basically anywhere else, just in case you needed access to it and, you know, there was something going on that prevented you from accessing it locally. But I should also add that part of putting copies somewhere is regularly auditing those copies and making sure that you can retrieve things and things are where you thought you left them. A backup's no good if you don't periodically go and restore from the backup and make sure it's still doing everything you hope and dream it would do.
Have we got time for more, Cassie? More questions? Does anyone want to ask? Here.
Hi, Ryan. I've got a question about serendipity. When we go to the place of digitizing collections, especially sort of 2D collections, some of the things that I really like about looking through collections or looking through libraries or archives is finding things at the end of the row that have been grouped together because lots of other people have looked at them in the past, or finding something next to the thing I thought I was looking for. Can you ruminate on the serendipity, the loss of serendipity in digital archives?
Well, I mean, I would start off by saying that it's not necessarily a loss, or it doesn't have to be. I mean, certainly there are things that you lose, but for example, in the digital asset management system I installed at Eastman House, there was the same 12 records on view every time you logged in. So the serendipity just happened in different places, but there was still like those kinds of natural end of the row things popping up. The same happens when you start using dissemination tools, or, you know, like Flickr was a great example of a place where Eastman House really saw what resonated and what didn't with a particular online community. And, you know, it's a very different thing once it's been digitized, because access almost becomes trivial. When you're in the institution, you've got the stuff sitting there to be looked at whenever you want. It's not a big deal to open up the dam and have a peek. It's a much bigger deal to, like, you know, ask the archivist to pull something or to go in and look at something. So when I think of the changes between digital, I don't think so much as the the changes that will occur as a result of the kind of physical to digital transition, as much as the just wealth of access opportunities that digital affords collection material. And kind of a big problem for institutions then becomes managing the results of that, and being able to use those results as ways to kind of explore more those kind of collections, or those kinds of not collections, connections between assets. Like the thing right next to something that's really popular online will get some spillover, just by people going and naturally clicking next or previous. And Eastman House saw that with Flickr really well, and that, like, when we put up one of the images that got a lot of attention on Flickr is a carte de visite of a guy holding his own head, like early trick photography. And what was interesting is that there's like a little kind of hill immediately surrounding that chronologically, like how the stuff was ordered on Flickr, that you could see the, like, people looking at the stuff adjacent to what gained popularity. So it's a little harder to find, because you've got to kind of look at the data, and you've got to look at the data in a particular way. But there's all kinds of interesting connections in there if you look long and hard enough at the access data.
Any more questions? Got a few more minutes. No? Ryan, I have a question.
Oh, yeah, shoot.
Yeah, so I just want to touch on your recent paper, Archiving Flickr,
okay.
and just talk about one of the things you said about it's all for the punters, and that access level where our content is moving out into web presence sites, out of our websites. And you talk about the complexities around the information, the deeper layer of engagement that community is adding to our digitisation, our collections in other places. Can you touch a little on, the complexities around either returning those comments and tags and things back into our collections, and, what should we really be archiving from these web presences?
That's an excellent question.
Thanks, Ryan.
I think that actually Flickr's a really good example of a data partner that's done an outstanding job of, one, approaching kind of cultural heritage institutions with a modicum of respect, which is something that doesn't always happen when working with other partners. A lot of data partners like to, especially like the bigger ones, basically the bigger the disparity between the size of your institution and the size of the partner institution, it seems the more like they approach everything with the attitude that they're doing you a huge favor by even talking to you. So that was one of the most interesting things about going from the George Eastman House to the Met, is that at Eastman House you'd have to fight for attention, and at the Met you kind of have to beat it down with a stick because you get too much of it sometimes. But to get back to the point of kind of that two-way sharing of data, is that Flickr enabled institutions to get all of the data that was added to their collection material out through their API. And that's something that at Eastman House we took seriously, and we got as far as getting keywords out from the tags that were added to the images, but we didn't yet have a good place to put comments and notes and some of the other data that can be added, but we certainly paid attention to it. And it's really important for me as a museum professional, when I'm sharing data with a partner like Flickr, to have there be some expectation that I will get that data back out, if it's been enriched, enhanced, or provided you're given additional context. To me, it's of limited utility to share stuff with some place. Let's just say Google as an example. If Google's not going to return, analytics for access, or if there's some sort of cleanup going on, I want a copy of that cleaned up data. And so it is important for institutions, as part of that third kind of often missed component of digital preservation, which is other museum output. If we put stuff on Flickr and people add data to it there, I want that data back for our records, because it was data. It's some interesting data points. Eastman House had an interesting position of being a museum of photography, so our curators were interested in not only the kind of veritas, or truth of photography, but also the misconceptions, what people think, the actual kind of day-to-day, which is, there's a lot of interesting information in Flickr for that. If you're at a, kind of a stricter art institution, you care less about that stuff, but it's still interesting data. And it's still important that if you're sharing something with somebody that they share too. It can't be a one-directional thing. And so I'm always leery of partners that don't have a good way to give me my data back.
Thank you. Suze, have we got any things coming through that people are talking about on Twitter?
A lot of people are actually sort of talking. Background. Hey, Ryan.
Hi, Suze.
Probably the main one, well, I've got a question, which is actually not coming from the Twitter, but you started talking about people interacting with your digital records, and you're talking on Flickr, but what about on your own websites or on other websites? How important do you think it is for people to be able to actually interact or speak back to your collection records?
I mean, I think it depends on your institution. There are a lot of places where, like at Eastman House, where it was kind of really great because we were interested in just about any piece of data, whether it was, a minor detail about an outfit somebody was wearing or the photographic process or basically just anything we were interested in. It could be less important for your institution if you're really only concerned with, how the artist fared in the art world, or, if your curatorial vision isn't kind of linked to kind of a democratic or kind of distributed thing, it might not be as interesting from that sake. I mean, as just a general museum person, I'm always interested in usage data because usage data enables us to see what resonates, what doesn't, what's working, what's not working. It's quantifiable. So I think whenever you're talking about web stuff, it's important to get analytics data out of it so that you could, kind of make these judgments as to what stuff dissemination-wise works and what doesn't. But in terms of getting all the data back, regardless of where it's from, it really depends on your curatorial mission. I would advocate for looking long and hard at that information because there's bound to be true and useful pieces in there, and I think that enabling those kinds of features in one's own OPAC or website is really key to audience development. I mean, unless you're at an institution where, that's not an issue, and there's only a handful of institutions where they don't really care about audience development. So I think that for most of us, allowing our patrons to kind of interact or contribute something back is a really powerful tool, one, in distributed QA. I mean, just in making sure that everything's lining up. If there are a bunch of stuff that we upload to Flickr where the dates are all wrong, I want somebody to tell me. So, there should always be some sort of communication mechanism as long as the institution's willing to actually listen. If the institution just wants to do something for, basically to say they did it, then those kinds of social features are counterproductive because when people find out that you're just doing it for show, they usually react poorly.
Okay, I think we have time for just one more. If anyone wants to finish up with a question. No. So, Ryan, I was just touching on writing down some of the stuff that you're talking about there, and I wanted you to maybe summarise, put you on the spot. So, with all the things you've talked about, changing technologies, audience behaviour, our missions, our aims, complex formats, metadata and everything that we have to deal with collections, what would be your top three, if you could summarise really quickly, a top three for digitisation?
Digitization. Top three what's? Points?
Well, no, if you had to put like top three, if you had to summarise into like 3 points, key points, could you do that now?
I could do that now.
Okay, good.
My first point would be that while you should always have a plan, you should also keep in mind that unexpected things can and will happen, and your plan might not you basically just need to have a plan that's not quite set in stone, because you'll discover things. You'll be in the middle of a giant digitization project, and you'll find out that the audience you're really hoping would be interested in it aren't interested anymore. So you should be flexible in your approach, but prepared for unintended consequences, or unintended cool stuff. I mean, we learned more about what people loved about the collection through Flickr than we gained in terms of, attention or revenue or whatever else. So my second point would be that, and some of this point's going to repeat, but you do need to plan. You do need to kind of know what you're going to do yourself, where you're going to store digital assets, what you're going to digitize, because it's a really terrible problem and a really expensive problem to have a whole pile of digital assets that have been managed poorly. So you need to kind of plan the whole life cycle from capture to storage to, if the scenario is appropriate, even kind of digital deaccessioning of material as you get a better digital copy, or, your collection changes. So point one, plan, but be flexible. And point two is just plan. Like, plan twice. That's intentional. My third point would be just to note that up until very recently, it was likely that your digitization of a particular object would not be the last time you would need to digitize that particular object. That is, in fact, changing. While it would be foolish of me to say that anything you digitize now, you'll never have to digitize it again, provided you're using a 60-megapixel Hasselblad, blah, blah, blah. But for the most part, we're actually at the point where increasing resolution or increasing bit depth isn't actually enabling us to get any additional interesting information out of the material itself. There'll always be microscopy and XRF and other kinds of imaging forms, particularly in conservation, that people go nuts for, the kinds of data it can produce. But in terms of kind of digital surrogate collection for 2D stuff, we no longer have to fear obsolescence quite as much as we did before, because we're at the point where the physical, our limitations are the prints, not the digitization equipment, which is actually a really awesome place to be at, because it means you've got one less problem. I think that was 3. Was that 3? Yeah, plan was twice, and then digitize, because we can digitize now, and we won't have to digitize it again unless something major happens. Yeah, I think those are my big 3.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Ryan. I'm sure everyone wants to take some time to say thank you to Ryan.
Thanks.
What time is it there?
It's 8:10.
Oh, it's okay. All right. Thank you
Yeah,
so
it's not
much,
that
Ryan.
late. I just wish I was there, because there's way better coffee there.
This is true. See you soon.
See ya.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.